Sometimes, life throws you a devastating curveball you never anticipated. For me, Selena, at 27 years old, it was the soul-crushing realization that my own flesh and blood would scheme to dismantle everything my beloved grandparents had meticulously built. They had waltzed into my home, their faces plastered with disingenuous smiles, utterly convinced they had me cornered. They gloated about transferring the house into my father's name and condescendingly informed me I had until Friday to vacate the premises. But the looks of utter shock and bewilderment that twisted their features when they returned with a moving truck to find who was waiting on my porch, well, that was a moment of pure, unadulterated justice. And honestly, they deserved every single second of it. To fully grasp why I went to such extraordinary lengths to defend my grandparents' legacy, you need to understand the entire story from its very beginning. My grandparents, Arthur and Isabel Morgan, raised me from the time I was 5 years old. My parents, Garrett and Serafina, essentially offloaded me onto them to pursue their careers in another state. In reality, what they were chasing was a life devoid of genuine responsibility, bouncing from one ill-conceived get-rich-quick scheme to another, each one failing more spectacularly than the last. The house where I grew up wasn't just any ordinary structure. It was a magnificent Victorian home nestled in a historic neighborhood of Boston. This mansion had been in my grandfather Arthur's family for 3 generations and was the centerpiece of a larger estate that included other significant properties and investments, valued at approximately $3 million. Not a small sum by any means, but for me, that house was simply home. It was within those walls that I learned the true definition of family. Every morning, Grandma Isabel would wake me with the heavenly aroma of freshly baked muffins wafting up the stairs. "Rise and shine, my little lawyer," she would chirp, long before I had even entertained the idea of attending law school. Grandpa Arthur, bless his patient soul, taught me how to fish in the small pond at the local park. His patience was seemingly endless, even as I managed to tangle my line for the 10th time in an hour. In the evenings, we would gather in the library, each of us lost in our own books, occasionally reading aloud a passage that particularly struck our fancy. Those tranquil moments, those small, shared experiences, they were my entire world. From them, I learned the values that would become the bedrock of my life: honesty, hard work, and accountability. "Your word is your bond, Selena," Grandpa used to say. "Break it, and you lose something you can never buy back." Grandma, on the other hand, constantly stressed the importance of education and independence. "A woman must be able to stand on her own 2 feet," she'd often declare, "especially when others try to knock her down." My relationship with my biological parents and my younger sister, Crystal, was, to put it mildly, strained. They would appear maybe twice a year, usually around Christmas when gifts were expected, or whenever they found themselves in a financial bind. Every visit followed the same predictable pattern: an initial wave of exaggerated affection, followed by casual inquiries about Grandpa's finances, and finally, a tear-soaked story about some unforeseen expense. This was invariably followed by a request for a loan that, of course, was never repaid. My father had declared bankruptcy twice before I even turned 10. My mother had dabbled in a series of questionable multi-level marketing ventures, peddling everything from miracle diet pills to fraudulent timeshares. They lived perpetually beyond their means, always searching for the next big score that would finally make them rich. Crystal, 7 years my junior, grew up observing and absorbing their behavior. By her teenage years, she had mastered their manipulative tactics and inherited their profound sense of entitlement. "Your sister should come live with us, too," Grandma once suggested after a particularly awful visit where Crystal had stolen money from my piggy bank. My parents flatly refused. Crystal was their baby, the child they could manage because she required very little actual parenting. As my grandparents aged, the family dynamics grew increasingly tense. My father started calling more often, his questions about their health, their wills, and their financial advisors becoming more pointed. My mother would send them links to assisted living facilities, subtly suggesting the house was becoming too much for them to manage. Each of their visits became a source of deep anxiety for me, punctuated by hushed conversations that would abruptly cease the moment I entered a room. Throughout my school years, I excelled academically, thanks to my grandparents' unwavering support. While other kids got the latest smartphones or designer clothes, my grandparents invested in books, museum memberships, and educational trips for me. When I was 16, I started working a part-time job at the local library to help with household expenses. My grandparents insisted it wasn't necessary, but I could see how the rising cost of prescriptions and property taxes were straining their fixed income. My decision to pursue a career in law wasn't merely a professional choice. It was profoundly influenced by an incident that happened in our neighborhood when I was a high school senior. The Wilsons, a lovely elderly couple, lost their entire life savings after their son convinced them to grant him power of attorney, which he then used to drain their bank accounts. The helplessness and utter betrayal they experienced haunted me. I knew then and there that I wanted to learn how to prevent such injustices, especially against vulnerable seniors. College and then law school were challenging, particularly as my grandparents' health began to decline. Grandpa developed heart problems that required multiple surgeries. Grandma was diagnosed with early-stage dementia. I deliberately chose a local university so I could live at home and care for them, turning down scholarships to more prestigious schools farther away. During my final year of law school, I was a whirlwind of activity, attending classes by day, studying late into the night, and squeezing in doctor's appointments and home care duties in between. It was utterly exhausting, but they had sacrificed so much for me. It was simply what family does. The day I graduated from law school was intensely bittersweet. Standing there in my cap and gown, I scanned the crowd and saw Grandpa in his wheelchair, an oxygen tank at his side, and Grandma seated next to him, looking occasionally confused, but always breaking into a wide, proud smile whenever our eyes met. They had insisted on coming, despite their health concerns. "Wild horses couldn't keep us away," Grandpa had rasped that morning as I helped him with his tie. My parents and Crystal, predictably, were absent, despite having been invited months in advance. Mom had sent a text that morning with some flimsy excuse about car trouble. I had stopped expecting them to show up for the important milestones in my life long ago, yet their absence still stung like a dull ache in my chest. After the ceremony, we had a celebratory dinner at Grandpa's favorite Italian restaurant. He raised his water glass for a shaky toast. "To our Selena, who makes us prouder every single day. The best granddaughter and now the best lawyer in Massachusetts." Grandma nodded enthusiastically, adding, smart as a whip, just like her grandfather. Their pure joy in my accomplishment filled me with a warmth that fortified my resolve to live up to the trust they placed in me. During my final semester, I had enrolled in an elective course on elder law and estate planning. What started as a practical choice, given my grandparents' situation, quickly became a passionate focus. Professor Evelyn Reed, a former prosecutor specializing in elder abuse cases, introduced our class to the horrifying realities of financial exploitation, often perpetrated by the victim's own family members. The greatest threat to an elderly person's financial security rarely comes from a stranger, Professor Reed told us. 70% of elder financial abuse is committed by family members or trusted caregivers. The sense of betrayal is often more devastating than the financial loss itself. Her words resonated with me, sending a chill down my spine. I immediately began researching protective legal mechanisms, particularly irrevocable trusts, which could shield assets from unscrupulous relatives while allowing the elderly to maintain control during their lifetime. With a growing sense of dread, I started noticing disturbing parallels between the case studies we discussed and my own family's dynamics. 2 weeks after graduation, I scheduled a private consultation with Diana Holt, an elder law specialist Professor Reed had recommended. I brought copies of my grandparents' financial documents, which I had access to from helping them manage their bills. Diana reviewed everything carefully, her expression growing more serious with each page. "Your instincts are spot on," she said finally. "Given the pattern of behavior you've described, and these recent inquiries from your father about property values, there is significant cause for concern. An irrevocable trust would offer substantial protection, but your grandparents would have to agree to establish it voluntarily. Have you spoken to them about this?" I hadn't, terrified they would dismiss my fears out of a lingering loyalty to their son. That evening, I gathered all my courage and gently broached the subject after dinner. At first, Grandpa reacted exactly as I had feared. "Garrett has his faults, but he would never try to take our home," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "He's still my son, Selena." Grandma was silent, nervously twisting her wedding ring as she often did when distressed. "What makes you think such a thing, dear?" she asked at last. Hesitantly, I laid out everything I had observed. The increased frequency of their visits coinciding with my grandparents' health scares, the incessant questions about their assets, the not-so-subtle suggestions that the house was too much for them. Then I showed them something I had kept to myself, an email I had discovered while helping Grandpa with his computer, an inquiry from my father to a real estate agent about comparable sales in their neighborhood and the potential market value of their home. Grandma began to cry softly. "He borrowed $50,000 5 years ago," she confessed, her voice trembling, "for a business opportunity that couldn't wait. He swore he'd pay it back with interest. But when your grandfather asked about it last Christmas, he got so angry, said we were wealthy enough not to miss it, that we owed him for taking you in." Grandpa's face had gone ashen, the color draining from it completely. "Show me that information about the trust again," he said finally, his voice heavy with resignation. We met with Diana Holt and began the process of creating the Morgan Family Trust. The legal journey was intricate, involving numerous meetings with lawyers, financial advisors, and the bank. We structured the trust so that my grandparents retained full control and benefit of all assets during their lifetimes. Upon their passing, however, I would become the successor trustee. The house, the investment portfolio, and other significant assets were transferred into the trust, effectively shielding them from any future claims or manipulation. We maintained absolute secrecy throughout the process. My grandparents told no one, not even their closest friends. I continued to live with them, starting my career at a small family law firm while balancing my caregiving duties. To any outside observer, nothing had changed, but I slept a little easier at night, knowing their home and legacy were finally secure from my parents' looming schemes. About 6 months after we finalized the trust, Grandpa's health took a sharp decline. We initially attributed his fatigue to his heart condition, but the truth was far more devastating: advanced-stage pancreatic cancer. The prognosis was grim, 3 to 6 months at most. We were shattered. Word of his diagnosis traveled quickly to my parents. Suddenly, they were calling daily and visiting every weekend, a level of attention unheard of in all the years I'd lived with my grandparents. Crystal even took a leave of absence from her job at a nail salon to help, though her help mostly consisted of snooping through closets and cabinets, taking inventory of valuable items when she thought no one was watching. One evening, I overheard my parents talking in the garden. They thought everyone was asleep, but I had gone downstairs to get Grandpa's medication. "Once the old man is gone, we need to move fast before she has time to hide anything," my father said. "Mom is so confused these days, she'll sign whatever we put in front of her." "What about Selena?" my mother asked, a hint of fear in her voice. "She's always watching, and she's a lawyer now." "She's a brand new lawyer with student loans and no real experience," he scoffed. "We'll offer her a small cut to keep her quiet. If she makes trouble, we'll contest any will on the grounds of undue influence. After all, she's been living here, dependent on them, possibly manipulating them." Who's a court going to believe? Her, or us, their actual children? I stood frozen, the glass of water in my hand growing warm as they callously discussed selling the house, liquidating the investments, and finally living the high life they felt they deserved. Crystal joined them, eagerly adding her own thoughts on which antiques would fetch the highest prices. I felt physically ill. The next morning, I checked in with Diana Holt, who confirmed all trust documents were properly filed and legally unassailable. She reassured me the protection was robust, but warned me to be vigilant against any attempts to have my grandmother sign new documents after my grandfather's passing. As Grandpa grew weaker, he could sense the vultures circling. One night, as I sat with him while he struggled for breath, he grabbed my hand with surprising strength. "Promise me," he rasped, "you'll protect your grandmother and this house. It's not just bricks and mortar, Selena. It's the physical embodiment of our family's history, our love, our sacrifices. Garrett never understood that. He only sees dollar signs. I see memories." "I promise, Grandpa," I said, tears streaming down my face. He nodded, a look of peace settling on his features. 3 days later, he slipped into a coma. He passed away quietly the next morning with Grandma and me at his side. The funeral was a quiet, dignified affair, exactly as Grandpa would have wanted. A small group of close friends, neighbors, and old colleagues gathered to celebrate his life. My parents and Crystal arrived 20 minutes late, dressed inappropriately for a somber occasion, and left immediately after the service, citing the long drive home. Before leaving, my father pulled me aside to ask bluntly when the will would be read. I delivered a brief eulogy, speaking of Grandpa's integrity, his quiet wisdom, and his unconditional love. Looking out at the small gathering, I realized that a life well lived isn't measured in wealth, but in the love one shares. By that measure, Grandpa had been an exceptionally rich man. After the funeral, the reality of being Grandma's primary caregiver set in fully. Her dementia, which had been progressing slowly, seemed to accelerate under the weight of her grief. Some days she knew me instantly. On others, she would ask repeatedly when Arthur was coming home from work. Each time, I had to gently remind her he was gone, forcing me to watch her experience the raw pain of her loss all over again. I adjusted my work schedule, taking on more cases I could handle remotely to spend more time at home. I hired Talia, a kind and compassionate home health aide, to stay with Grandma when I had to be in the office or in court. In the evenings, we developed new routines, watching classic movies Grandma remembered from her youth, poring over old photo albums, reading aloud from her favorite novels. These activities seemed to ground her, providing islands of clarity in her increasingly foggy world. My parents called occasionally, their inquiries about Grandma's health always carrying an undertone that sounded more like checking on an investment than expressing genuine concern. I kept my answers brief, growing more protective as Grandma's condition worsened. 6 months after Grandpa's death, Grandma developed pneumonia. Despite aggressive treatment, her frail system couldn't fight off the infection. Her final days were spent at home, peacefully in her own bed, just as she had always wished. I read to her from Jane Austen, her favorite author, and played the classical music she and Grandpa had loved. On her last evening, she had a moment of startling lucidity. She looked at my hand holding hers and squeezed it. "Serafina," she whispered, mistaking me for my mother. "I'm so proud of the woman you've become." "So different from," her voice trailed off, then she refocused. "Take care of our Selina." Before I could correct her, she had drifted back to sleep. She never woke again, passing peacefully in the night, her hand still holding mine. The funeral was even smaller than Grandpa's. My parents didn't come. They sent a generic floral arrangement with a card signed by their secretary. I wasn't surprised, just deeply saddened by the final confirmation of their true characters. I buried my grandmother next to my grandfather in the small cemetery where generations of Morgans rested. I found comfort in knowing they were together again. I returned to a house that was now utterly empty, a place that echoed with memories both comforting and painful. For the first time, I was truly alone, without the grandparents who had been my anchors, my true north. But I was also fortified by the legacy of their love and the principles they had taught me. I would honor them by protecting what they built and using it as they would have wanted. 2 weeks after Grandma's funeral, as I was still adjusting to the profound silence of the house and the weight of my grief, the doorbell rang on a Sunday morning. When I opened it, my parents and Crystal were standing there, their faces arranged into masks of practiced sorrow. "Oh, Selina," my mother exclaimed, pulling me into a stiff, awkward hug that felt more like a performance than genuine compassion. "We're so sorry about your grandmother. We came as soon as we could clear our schedules." My father nodded solemnly. "Family needs to stick together at times like these," he said, patting my shoulder before moving past me into the foyer, his eyes already appraising the antique furniture and paintings. Crystal, a 20-year-old dressed like a teenager, gave me a quick side hug. "This house is even bigger than I remember," she remarked, making no attempt to hide her assessment of its value. I let them in, maintaining a polite but distant demeanor, offering them coffee and pastries. As we sat in the living room, the conversation followed a predictable script I could have written myself. It began with a few perfunctory questions about Grandma's final days, before quickly shifting to the topic of inheritance. "So, have you had a chance to go through her papers?" my father asked, feigning a casual tone. "I assume there's a will that needs to be probated." "I'm handling everything," I replied neutrally. "Her affairs were all in order." My mother leaned forward, her voice dropping to what she must have thought was a sympathetic whisper. "You must be so lonely in this big house all by yourself. It's so much for one person to maintain." "Actually, I'm managing just fine," I stated. "I love this house." "Well, of course you do, sweetie," she said with a condescending smile. "But realistically, a young woman like you should be in a modern apartment downtown, closer to other young professionals. Your father and I were thinking we could help you sell this place and find something more suitable." My father nodded in agreement. "Property values in this neighborhood are at an all-time high. It would be a smart move to sell now, before the market turns." "And of course," Crystal chimed in, inspecting her nail polish, "whatever comes from Grandma and Grandpa's estate should be split fairly among the family. I mean, just because you lived with them doesn't mean you get everything, right?" Their transparency was almost comical. Had I not been so heartbroken and disgusted, I might have laughed at how clumsily they veiled their greed. Instead, I simply said I wouldn't be making any decisions about the house anytime soon and changed the subject. They stayed for 3 days. I found my mother rummaging through Grandma's jewelry box when she thought I was on a work call. My father was caught measuring rooms and taking pictures, supposedly for memories. Crystal relentlessly tried to pump Talia, who had stopped by to check on me, for information about bank accounts and safe deposit boxes. On the second night, I stepped onto the back porch for some air and overheard my father on the phone with someone, discussing real estate valuations. "The house should appraise for at least $3.2 million in this market," he said, "maybe more with a few updates. We just need to move quickly once we have control." Later that night, I found a browser window left open on Crystal's laptop. The search history was filled with queries like how to challenge an irrevocable trust and disputing an inheritance and proving undue influence. The following morning, I confronted them calmly over breakfast. "I've noticed you all seem very interested in the house and Grandma's assets," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. "Is there something specific you're looking for?" My father flushed but quickly composed himself. "Just trying to help you sort things out, honey. You've got enough on your plate with your new career and all this grief." My mother nodded vigorously. "We're just concerned about you, darling. It's so much responsibility for someone so young. We want to make sure everything is handled fairly. Grandma and Grandpa might have been confused in their later years," Crystal added pointedly. I simply nodded and said I appreciated their concern, but I had it all under control. They left later that day, promising to be back soon to help more. The moment their car was out of the driveway, I called Diana Holt and updated her. She advised me to remain vigilant, but reassured me that the trust was legally sound. I didn't hear from them for several weeks. I began to hope, foolishly, that they had accepted the situation and moved on. I was immersing myself in a new case at work, finally finding a routine that didn't revolve around caregiving when they reappeared. One morning, as I was leaving for work, the 3 of them marched up the front walk, their faces alight with triumph. My father was holding a folder of documents. "Good morning, Selina," he said, his tone laced with false pity. We hate to do this, but we need to have a talk about your living situation. My mother stepped forward, a strange smile on her face. We found some papers in our safe deposit box. An older will your grandparents signed years ago, leaving everything to your father as their only son. We had it verified by an attorney, Crystal added, practically buzzing with excitement. We also have documents showing the house has been signed over to Dad. That trust you think protects you. Apparently, it's not valid when there's a prior will. My father held the folder out to me. We're not unreasonable. We'll give you until Friday to pack your things. We've already lined up a buyer for the house. I looked at their smug faces, at the folder of what I knew were fraudulent documents, and a strange sense of calm settled over me. You really think I would let that happen? I asked softly. Their confidence faltered for a fraction of a second, but my father quickly recovered. This is happening whether you like it or not. Friday, Selena, be out by noon. As they turned to leave, I called after them. Before you do anything you'll regret, you might want to consult a better lawyer, one who knows the difference between a real will and a fabrication. My father's face darkened. Don't you threaten me, young lady. You're not the only one who knows the law. With that final, hollow threat, they departed, utterly convinced of their victory. The moment my family left with their threats and their counterfeit documents, I transitioned from grieving granddaughter to determined lawyer. My legal training surged to the forefront, alongside the fierce, protective instincts my grandparents had instilled in me. This was no longer just about inheritance. It was about honoring my promise, defending their legacy, and finally standing up to a lifetime of manipulation and entitlement. My first call was to Caleb Ward, the top litigator and fraud expert at my firm. "Caleb, can you come over tonight?" I asked, my voice steady. "My family is attempting to steal my grandparents' estate with forged documents. They've given me until Friday to vacate the house." Caleb arrived within the hour, his paralegal in tow. I laid everything out on the dining room table. The trust documents, my grandparents' medical records proving their competency when they signed, the detailed journal I had kept chronicling my parents' suspicious behavior, and an account of the bogus claims they had just made. "If what they showed you is what I think it is, they're committing multiple felonies," Caleb said, his expression grim. "Forgery, fraud, attempted larceny by deception. But we need to see those documents to be certain." My next call was to Diana Holt, the architect of the trust. "They're making their move," I told her. "And it's as brazen as we feared." Diana was a beacon of calm reassurance. "The trust is ironclad, Selena, but we should file for an emergency injunction to prevent them from attempting to record any fraudulent deeds or transfers. I'll draft it tonight and file it first thing in the morning." While my legal team mobilized, I shifted to practical security. I called a locksmith who came that afternoon and changed every lock on the house. Next, I hired a security company to install cameras at all entry points. By nightfall, the house was a fortress. I made one last call to my bank, confirming all estate accounts were flagged for suspicious activity. The bank manager, who had known my grandparents for decades, was appalled by my situation and personally placed alerts on everything connected to the estate. As evening descended, I organized all the trust paperwork, making multiple copies and storing them in different secure locations. One set in my home safe, another with Caleb, a third with Diana, and encrypted digital versions in cloud storage. There would be no single point of failure. That evening, as I was reviewing everything, my phone began ringing incessantly with calls from my parents and Crystal. I let every call go to voicemail. The texts started out deceptively mild, with my father suggesting we talk this out like adults, but they quickly escalated to thinly veiled threats. "You have no idea who you're messing with," was the final message on my father's last voicemail. "You will respect me. That house and that money are rightfully mine, and I will have them, one way or another." The next morning, I met with an expanded legal team, now including Myra Duval, a specialist in estate litigation, brought in by Caleb. She reviewed our documents and strategy. "Their claim about a prior will superseding the trust is legal nonsense," she stated unequivocally. "Once assets are placed into an irrevocable trust, they are no longer part of the probate estate to be distributed by a will." Any competent lawyer would know this, which suggests they either have a very poor attorney or, more likely, no legitimate legal counsel at all. We solidified a multi-pronged strategy. First, the injunction to block any property transfers. Second, a cease and desist letter addressing their fraudulent claims. And third, preparing for a potential lawsuit against them for harassment and attempted fraud if they persisted. "What about the documents they claim to have?" I asked. "The supposed older will and property transfer. If they attempt to file those anywhere, we will immediately challenge them as forgeries," Myra explained. "We have overwhelming evidence of your grandparents' intent with the properly executed trust, their medical records confirming their sound state of mind, the journal you kept, and witnesses like Talia who can testify to their clear wishes." While the legal team worked, I did some digging of my own. Leveraging research skills and contacts from law school, I compiled a dossier on my parents' history of financial instability. I documented my father's 2 bankruptcies, an outstanding tax lien, and a small claims judgment against my mother from a failed business venture where she took investments but never delivered a product. By Thursday afternoon, my family's desperation was palpable. Crystal posted a rambling, incoherent diatribe on social media, claiming I had manipulated our ailing grandparents and stolen the family birthright. She tagged distant relatives and neighborhood acquaintances in a pathetic attempt to sway public opinion against me. My parents took a more direct approach. They showed up at my law firm unannounced, demanding to speak with me. When the receptionist informed them I was in court, they caused such a scene, refusing to leave, that building security had to escort them out. My colleagues were shocked but incredibly supportive, the incident only strengthening their resolve to help me. Later that day, a concerned neighbor called to tell me my father had been going door to door on my street, telling people I was mentally unstable and trying to rally community support for their takeover of the property. Fortunately, most of our neighbors had known my grandparents and me for years and were deeply suspicious of these suddenly present, agitated relatives they had barely ever seen. As Friday loomed, I prepared for every contingency. Caleb would be at the house with me, along with Diana and a notary public to witness any interaction. Talia would also be present, ready to provide a statement about my grandparents' mental state and expressed wishes if needed. I proactively contacted the local police department, explaining the situation and requesting they be on alert in case my family attempted a forced entry or created a disturbance. The officer I spoke with took detailed notes and assured me he would flag the address for a priority response. Finally, I set up legally compliant recording devices in the main living areas of the house. Massachusetts is a two-party consent state, so I posted clear, visible signs at all entrances stating that audio and video recording were in progress, fulfilling the notification requirement. On Thursday night, sleep was impossible, my mind racing through 1,000 different scenarios. But beneath the anxiety, there was a bedrock of resolve. I was doing exactly what my grandparents would have wanted, protecting the home they had cherished for generations from people who saw it only as a cash machine. Whatever happened tomorrow, I would face it with the courage and integrity they had taught me. Friday morning dawned bright and clear, a beautiful spring day that was in stark contrast to the storm brewing in my family affairs. I woke early after a restless night, showered, and dressed methodically in a professional navy blue suit. I found myself instinctively reaching for the simple pearl earrings Grandma had given me for my law school graduation. For important days, she had said, this certainly qualified. By 8:30 a.m., my support system was in place. Caleb arrived first, with coffee and a reassuring calm. "We've got every legal angle covered," he said. "Today is just about holding your ground." Diana arrived next with the notary, Octavia, a stern-faced woman who looked as if she had witnessed 1,000 property disputes. Talia came soon after, giving me a supportive, motherly hug before busying herself in the kitchen, where she began to stress bake. The comforting scent of cinnamon soon filled the house. Myra Duval completed our team, delivering copies of the emergency injunction the court had granted the previous day, which now legally barred the recording of any property transfers related to the estate. "Just in case they try to go directly to the registry of deeds," she explained. We positioned ourselves strategically. I would meet my family on the front porch, a symbolic threshold they would have to cross. The others would remain inside, out of sight but ready to step forward when needed. On the small table next to the porch swing, I placed a folder containing the key trust documents, the court injunction, and proof of the estate's protected status. A visual counterweight to whatever fraudulent papers my family might produce. At 11:45 a.m., 15 minutes before their self-imposed eviction deadline, a black SUV pulled up to the curb. Behind it, a large moving truck rumbled, its engine idling as it double-parked on the narrow street. Several neighbors paused their gardening to watch the unfolding drama. My father emerged first from the SUV, dressed in what he clearly considered his power suit, a garment slightly too tight at the shoulders, with ostentatious cufflinks. My mother followed, her face a mask of grim determination, hiding her eyes behind oversized sunglasses. Crystal bounded out last, practically vibrating with excitement, her phone already in hand as if she were about to film a triumphant reality show moment. Two burly men from the moving truck got out, looking distinctly uncomfortable as they sized up the tense atmosphere. My father waved them forward impatiently. I rose slowly from the porch swing, folder in hand, and waited. I would let them come to me, on my ground, in the home my grandparents had entrusted to me. "Right on time to see you off, I see," my father called out as they approached the front walk. "I trust you're packed and ready to go." He brandished the folder he was carrying, the one supposedly containing his forged documents. I stood tall on the top step of the porch, saying nothing as they advanced. Several neighbors had subtly moved closer, their presence a silent, protective barrier. "We brought the truck to help you with your things," my mother added, her voice deceptively sweet, an act of familial concern for the audience of onlookers. We know this must be difficult. As they reached the bottom of the porch steps, I finally spoke, my voice calm and clear. Before you come any further, I am legally obligated to inform you that this property is under video and audio surveillance, and there are witnesses inside the house. Anything you say or do is being recorded. That gave them a moment's pause. My father recovered first, his smile tightening. Always with the drama, Selina, that doesn't change anything. We have the legal documents that give us ownership of this property. He waved his folder again. You mean your forged documents? I asked quietly. The ones that you believe magically override an irrevocable trust established over a year ago when both of my grandparents were alive, of sound mind and legally competent. My mother's smile faltered. Crystal glanced uncertainly at her parents, the script clearly not playing out as she had imagined. My father's face darkened, and he took the first 2 steps up the stairs. Now you listen here. This house belongs to me. My parents wanted me to have it. Whatever legal mumbo-jumbo you tricked them into signing when they were sick doesn't change that. Just then, the front door opened behind me. Caleb stepped out, followed by Diana, Myra, Octavia the notary, and Talia. My father stopped dead in his tracks, his eyes widening as he took in the sight of 5 composed, professional, and clearly prepared individuals. Mr. Morgan, Caleb said pleasantly. I'm Caleb Ward, attorney for the Morgan Family Trust. I believe you were just about to accuse your daughter of fraud and undue influence. Please continue. We're recording for the court record. My father's mouth opened and closed like a fish. My mother grabbed his arm, whispering urgently in his ear. The movers shifted uncomfortably, one of them checking his watch. Perhaps you should tell your movers they won't be needed today, I said quietly. Or any day. My father finally found his voice, sputtering. This is absurd. I have a legal right to this place. I have the papers right here. He gestured with his folder but made no move to open it. Myra stepped forward, her professional demeanor unshakable. As counsel for the estate, I must inform you that we have obtained an emergency injunction from the court preventing any attempts to record fraudulent property transfers related to this address. She held out a copy of the court order. Furthermore, I should advise you that knowingly presenting forged documents to perpetrate a fraud is a felony in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, punishable by up to 5 years in prison. The color drained from my father's face. My mother tried a different tack, stepping forward. Selina, honey, there's obviously been a misunderstanding. We only want what's best for the family. Maybe we can all go inside and discuss this privately, without all these people. There is nothing to discuss, I said firmly. Grandma and Grandpa created the Morgan Family Trust to protect their assets and their legacy. All properties and investments are held by that trust, which I now administer as the designated trustee. This was their choice, made freely while they were of sound mind and body. Any documents you possess that claim otherwise are fraudulent. My father's temper finally boiled over. This isn't over, Selina. I am your father. That has to count for something legally. I'll fight this all the way to the Supreme Court if I have to. I'll make sure everyone knows how you manipulated 2 old people. Your reputation will be ruined. Caleb stepped forward again. Mr. Morgan, are you now threatening to file frivolous lawsuits and engage in defamation? Because that would constitute harassment and potentially extortion. Shall I add that to the record? The driver of the moving truck cautiously approached. Sir, we're on the clock here. Are we moving anything or not? My father ignored him, his face contorted with rage. You ungrateful little after everything we've done for you." A short, incredulous laugh escaped my lips. "Everything you've done for me. You abandoned me when I was 5 years old. Grandma and Grandpa raised me. They loved me. They taught me everything that matters about life and family. You only ever showed up when you needed money or saw something you could take." The raw truth of it hung in the air between us. Even Crystal looked ashamed, her phone now hanging limply at her side, no longer documenting the humiliating spectacle. "And I have something else you should hear," I said, taking out my own phone. I played the recording I had made of their conversation in the garden during Grandpa's final days, their voices sharp and clear as they plotted to exploit Grandma's confusion and cut me out completely. My mother gasped audibly. My father's face turned a mottled shade of purple. "That's illegal," he stammered. "You can't record people without their consent." "Actually," Diana interjected smoothly, "Massachusetts law allows for recording if the person recording is a party to the conversation or has the consent of one party." Selina was present and consented to her own recording. It's perfectly admissible. At that moment, a police car pulled up, responding to calls from concerned neighbors about the escalating confrontation. As two officers approached, my father seemed to finally grasp the utter hopelessness of his position. "This isn't over," he snarled, backing down the steps. "Family shouldn't treat family this way." "On that," I said softly, "we finally agree." The police asked if there was a problem. I calmly explained that my relatives had been operating under a misunderstanding regarding property ownership, but that the matter was now resolved. My legal team provided them with copies of the trust documents and the injunction for their report. Defeated, my parents and sister slunk back to their SUV. The moving truck, its purpose unfulfilled, rumbled away down the street. As they drove off, I felt no sense of victory, only a profound sadness for the family that should have been, but never was. Talia came up and put a hand on my shoulder. "Your grandparents would be so proud of you," she said softly. "So very proud." And standing there on the porch my grandfather had built, surrounded by people who had shown me more loyalty and care than my own blood relatives, I knew she was right. It had never been about the money or the house. It was about honoring the true meaning of family and keeping the promises you make to the people you love.